Hello and welcome to yesterday's Airlines. I'm just back from a quick trip to Madeira, which was very nice. Can highly recommend it if you haven't been. And in my absence, there have been multiple announcements from different manufacturers, as I expected there would be. So, got a few videos to make, see how I get through those. But we're going to start with the geminijets November announcements. And this video hopefully will be a reasonably quick one because, as we know with Gemini, they only release a small number of models each month in higher volumes, but a small number. So we've only got 9 models to discuss, which should make it reasonably quick. Should also be reasonably quick because they're not very interesting. I have to say Gemini have had a not bad 2023. I think I've said this in most of the videos, but this month it isn't anywhere near as good as some of the previous months. In fact, it's really quite boring. So that should mean that this is a quicker video, but nonetheless doesn't mean that it's not interesting to discuss the models and why I think it is not their best month ever. And also to look perhaps at, what is the fundamental issue, I think, facing Gemini in the current age. So I'll talk about that perhaps at the end of the video. But before we get started, obviously, chuck a like on the video if you're enjoying the content, subscribe to the channel, and check me out on Instagram at yesterairlines, and of course, yesterdaysairlines.com, the website where the hub of the content lives. But for now, let's get down and have a closer look at what Gemini is going to be putting out in the next month. So yeah, just the 9 models, not too unusual a size of a release set for Gemini. And when you look across the airlines that are being released here, it's oh so Gemini, Delta, United, Emirates, Lufthansa, Southwest, UPS. There's no real surprise in terms of the airlines that are being represented here. Even the other airlines are ones that Gemini has made before. So that in itself is not a great start. But if we begin, we'll start with the Airbuses, as I usually do. And the first up is a Delta Airlines A319 N371NB. And if it feels at all familiar that I'm discussing a Delta Airlines A319, then that's because it is, because NG announced one last month. So is this just a coincidence? I'm minded to think it's not. I'm minded to think this has been hanging around for a while, and Gemini probably feel they need to get it out there before they lose any market for it that there was. As I said in the NG video, there actually haven't been many Delta A319s. The only ones of any quality that have been made before have been by Aero Classics. The Gemini versions are very, very old. I think they date from 2014, and they're using the original Gemini A319 mold, which is ancient. This new one is going to be using the new newer jcwings mold, but it just can't compete with the NG models mold at all. So this is just not really competitive, even though it's not a train wreck, this mold, and it has actually had some shape improvement by jcwings. It can't compete with the NG A319. Arguably, I wouldn't say it even competes particularly well with the Aero Classics version. Obviously, it's got perhaps better landing gear and it's got aerials, but just in form, it is not quite as good. So, yeah, nothing really exciting to see here. I don't know why you'd buy this when the NG one has been announced and is going to be out soon. So this is a workhorse, definitely. And it's a similar kind of story, really, with the next model, which is an Avianca A320 N567AV. This one's in the Tarka Retro livery. But again, NG have got here before you. Sorry, Gemini, but you've been gazumped. They made this model months ago. And in fact, NG have now made or announced 6 of these Avianca A320s, 4 of them in the heritage schemes, and 2 that are just announced, which I haven't discussed yet, but will be in the next video. So that kind of illustrates, I see, for me, what NG are offering that Gemini aren't. So Gemini create one of these on a really ordinary mold. It's not a dreadful mold again, like the A319, but it's effectively the same thing. Engines are a bit big for the CFMs. The mold is okay. But, NG have offered 6, and the mold's better. The diversity's better. It's just better, a better product, isn't it? So again, why wouldn't I just workhorse this one? Not bad, it's not going to be great, it's certainly not going to be as good as the one you probably bought already. Next up is something which is unique. It's the United Airlines A321neo. The reg is N44501, and this is the first A321neo for United Airlines. And it is also the first one that's been announced in 400 scale, but it isn't going to be the last. Don't fool yourself and rush out and think I have to get this one because there's never going to be another one made. Clearly, it's going to get made by other brands. It'll probably get made by Panda and ngmodels at some point. So again, you've got to think about what you're buying here. And whereas the A320 CEO mold is decent but not spectacular, the A320 and 21 Neo mold that they're using has the same base fuselage, which is just bog ordinary, with enormous engines on it. And if you look at the pictures of previous releases, you can see how ugly and destabilizing the engines are. And I've talked about this many times on these videos, so probably don't need to cover it again, but frankly, it's just not good enough. So, yeah, not sure why you'd buy this, to be honest, even though it is the first one out there. You have to be pretty keen to get it, and it's pretty sure that NG will announce it. I'm sure they will. So yeah, I'm gonna gas guzzle it. I just don't really think the mold is good enough. I do have a couple of their Neos, I admit, to my shame, but they're not scoring high in my collection. And in fact, one of the ones I do have is the Ural Airlines A320 Neo. And this month they announced the Ural Airlines A321 Neo RA73800. And again, it's got all the same issues that the United will have, except that no one else has made it before. It does seem that Gemini have a connection with some Russian airlines. Ural Airlines is one that they've made previously, as I say. So timing is obviously not great considering the war in Ukraine. And yeah, there's not a lot more to say really. The Ural scheme is nice enough, and this would be nice, and I'd probably buy it if it were on a better mold, but I'm not going to buy the A321 Neo on this Gemini mold. So I'm going to put this in gas guzzler as well. Just really not good enough, and they've had plenty of time to fix those engines, and they haven't. So that leaves us with a couple more Airbuses to discuss, and these are both wide bodies. The first one is arguably a fantasy model. It's an Emirates A350-900. The registration is A6EXA, and even though that registration may be given to the first Emirates A350, they don't have any yet. The aircraft doesn't exist. I get the feeling this is made at Emirates' request, as is often the case for Emirates releases for Gemini. It's unlikely anyone else will make it because of the agreement that they have, and Emirates getting grumpy when people do make their models. They've got 50 of these on order. Doesn't look like they're going to enter service though until quite late next year. So this one is ahead of time. Obviously, Emirates have changed their livery recently, so they're not likely to change it. So it's likely to look like this, but you just have to be careful that it might not. There might be something different about it. Maybe the reg will change. I don't know. So a little bit skeptical about it. And the Gemini jcwings A350 is fine, but they sometimes make a mess of the cockpit printing quite regularly, and it's not as good as competing A350s, except for the Phoenix one. It's better than that one, obviously. So yeah, it's not exciting me. I could fly it, but I don't think I'm going to put it in workhorse because it is a bit early. I'm just not 100% convinced that the aircraft will look exactly like this. But I guess if you really want an Emirates A350, then they're probably going to be the only ones in town. So no, I'm going to workhorse it. There's a good chance that Gemini will release another one anyway. Let's be honest. I mean, they release most wide bodies multiple times. And on that topic, the next model is a Lufthansa A380. The registration is DAIMK. Deeply ordinary, really. Don't really, again, know why this one's being made, to be honest. There have been relatively recent Lufthansa new colours A380s made by Aviation 400 and Phoenix. Both of those were at the end of last year, and they were both great. In fact, the Aviation 400 one obviously is a bit better than the Phoenix, but the Phoenix one's much better than the Gemini JC A380. And they have made this scheme before Gemini. Obviously, 2 they made it not a million moons ago in 2019. So it has been done before, and their mold is quite heavily inferior to the competition nowadays. So again, I could gas guzzler it, but that's a little harsh. I don't dislike the mold that much, but it is definitely inferior by a long distance to the A380. So I'm going to put this one again in the workhorse. It's an incredibly workhorsey month for Gemini, have to say. And that leaves us just 3 models to discuss, 2 Boeings and a McDonnell Douglas. And the first Boeing is Southwest Airlines. It's a MAX 8. It's N8710 Mike. It's the Imua 1 scheme, which is a beautiful, beautiful livery. But much like with the Avianca and the Delta, they've been gazumped, haven't they, by ngmodels who got here some time ago with a quite beautiful version of this model. The JC Gemini Max is a great mold, but it's probably slightly inferior to the NG models one. NG didn't seemingly make a mess of the livery, and it's a beautiful livery. Why wouldn't you have just bought that? I just don't understand that. So again, it's a workhorse model. Even though it may turn out fine, surely everyone's already bought it who wanted it. Who knows what they're doing anyway, and I just don't really see the need for it. So yeah, I'm going to put it workhorse. If NG hadn't made it already, then it would be high flyer or even supersonic, but it isn't, because they have. And carrying on this same feel, the last Boeing is a United Parcel Services 747-400 freighter N581UP, and this is such a Gemini model that, again, I suspect it's being made for UPS and not necessarily just for general release, because they made quite a few of these. It is not, incidentally, an interactive version. They've made one of those not long ago, and that interactive version, it was last year, that interactive version uses the new mold, but they don't have a new slot-in wings version of the non-interactive 747-400s. This is going to be using their old seamed mold with the cradle mount, which is okay, but again, it's not spectacularly good. They made one most recently in 2017, but they've made previous versions as well, several of them, in fact. I'm looking. I can see 5 altogether made by Gemini. There may be some slight differences, but broadly they're the same. Yeah, it's just a workhorse again, isn't it? And that's perhaps being generous. It's really nothing to get excited about, and presumably this is mainly made for UPS in the same way the Emirates A350 is mainly made for Emirates. So a really, really ordinary month so far, and the only real highlight is the last model, which is a Transworld Airlines MD-80 N960 TW wearing the 90s globe scheme. And this model is really interesting because it's obviously never been made before. It's one of those MD-80s which has clearly been dying out to be made for years. Suddenly Gemini are beginning to use their MD-80 mold, just as NG have effectively announced a better one, because the NG samples are significantly better than the Gemini jcwings MD-80. But I don't know for certain NG will make this, or when they'll make it. If they do, I don't think they will make it, but when is the question. So is 1 in the hand worth 2 in the bush? Maybe. And I'm not really sure whether to get this or not, to be honest. I think it will be decent, but it's obviously not going to be stunning, because the mold does have weaknesses around the nose and the landing gear. Yeah. I'm going to put this in supersonic, though, for that whole 1 in the hand, 2 in the bush concept. I can't be sure NG are going to make this soon. I think it will get made by then, but I don't know when. And I'm going to put it in supersonic, but I'm not entirely certain whether I'm going to buy it or not, I have to say. Have to give that one some thought, but at least it is a model in the right direction, and it is an interesting aircraft airline combo, unlike pretty much everything else they've made this month. So that is the look of the Gemini November announcements. They are poor, really. A collection of models that have been made better by NG already, or models on weak molds that should be updated, or the future Emirates A350. And this kind of brings up, I guess, what I was alluding to at the start of the video in terms of what is Gemini's biggest problem. It's not necessarily that their quality is quite hit and miss, and they sometimes produce some real messes, like the Copa 737-800 that I just saw some pictures of a few weeks ago. That's a disaster in terms of the cockpit printing once again. It's not that necessarily. It's more that effectively what Gemini are becoming is just the mass market producer for people that don't really care. They're making the same models as NG, but the comparison between the two is light and day. NG are making a better product overall in terms of the mold and the finishing, and quite often in terms of getting the models out earlier than Gemini do too, because NG simply produce much wider range of models per month than Gemini do, or can maybe. So really, yeah, there's a lot of mediocrity, and that has been a recurring theme. Even though this has been quite a good year for Gemini and they've been making some interesting models, there's also been a lot of chaff that's been made previously by NG on better molds. And if you know what you're doing, if you watch these videos, if you pay attention, you're already going to own or have pre-ordered that Delta, Aviation or Southwest. You'd have already bought that Lufthansa A380 from AV400, and you're just going to wait for that United A321neo to come out on a better mold because you know it is going to happen. And you can make the same suggestion for the TWA MD-80. So effectively here you've got a selection of models that really don't need to exist. And that's not a good look, really. Now, it does seem that Gemini are still selling well. They're clearly a big enough market, and there are lots of people who don't know what they're doing. So they don't seem to be in any kind of trouble whatsoever. But if you're paying close attention to the scale, then they're hardly the leader, are they? And what they're producing here is middle of the road, workhorse style models on a regular basis. Okay, anyway, that's my view. Feel free to disagree. I'm sure Gemini do, but this has not been their best month this year in any way. And that's it for this video. So should hopefully, if I find the time, be able to do videos for the Phoenix and the NG models announcements. I may sound like I'm praising NG a huge amount, but to be honest, their announcements this month are not particularly exciting either. So check out those videos when they arrive on the channel. But otherwise, that's it from me for now. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.